She wasn't looking for meaning when she lost everything, only a way back to the life she'd built. But sometimes, the path forward begins with complete surrender. What happens when success itself becomes the prison you never knew you were in? This is the story of a woman who had to lose her world to find herself. Stay with me. Alexandra Reed checked her reflection in the elevator's polished brass. Perfect tailoring, not a hair out of place. At 42, she'd mastered the art of projecting success. The slight tremble in her hands was the only betrayal of what was happening behind the confident smile. 32 floors up, her corner office overlooked a Manhattan that had always seemed to belong to her. The skyline was turning golden in the late afternoon light, the same skyline she'd conquered deal by deal, year by year. The same view she might never see again after today. "The board's waiting, Ms. Reed," her assistant said, not quite meeting her eyes. Alexandra nodded, straightening her shoulders. She'd built Horizon Ventures from nothing, transformed it into a boutique investment firm that larger companies coveted. 10 years of 60-hour weeks, of canceled vacations and relationships that withered from neglect. 10 years of proving herself in rooms full of men who underestimated her. And now, one catastrophic investment decision threatened to unravel everything. Then the sign. Conference room fell silent as she entered. Faces she'd known for years, some friends, some rivals, all wearing the same expression of polite regret, the kind that said they'd already decided her fate. Alexandra, Martin, the head of the board, gestured to her usual seat. "We've reviewed the situation extensively." She sat, back straight, face composed. The familiar weight of her grandmother's watch pressed against her wrist, the only thing she'd inherited besides an uncompromising work ethic. The Westlake development failure has created a situation that's... Martin paused, searching for the right corporate euphemism for disaster. "Untenable," Alexandra finished for him. "I'm aware of the numbers." The $40 million investment had collapsed spectacularly when the environmental report she'd trusted proved fraudulent. The land was contaminated beyond remediation. The lawsuit was just beginning, but the damage to the firm's reputation, to her reputation, was immediate. "We've prepared a separation package." Martin slid a folder across the polished table. "Given your equity position and the current circumstances, I'm afraid it's the best we can do." Alexandra opened the folder, her expression unchanged as she scanned the document. The figure at the bottom was barely enough to cover 6 months of her mortgage. Her stomach tightened, but she refused to let them see her fear. "I built this company," she said quietly. "And we're grateful for that legacy," Martin replied, the past tense hanging in the air between them. "But the board has lost confidence." Outside, rain had begun to fall, streaking the floor-to-ceiling windows. Alexandra remembered standing in this same room 10 years earlier, pitching her vision to skeptical investors. She'd been so certain, then so hungry. "I'd like a moment alone, please," she said. They filed out silently, relief evident in their hurried departures. Only Martin lingered at the door. "For what it's worth, I fought for you," he said. "But business is business." When the door closed, Alexandra finally allowed herself to breathe. The panic she'd been holding at bay rushed in. Her phone buzzed, her financial advisor, no doubt having heard the news. She silenced it without looking. There would be time for damage control later. She walked to the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass. Rain blurred the city into watercolors. 10 years of sacrifice, of missed birthdays and holidays, of putting this company above everything else. For what? To be discarded the moment things went wrong, the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks finally settled over her. This wasn't just a professional setback. The Westlake failure had wiped out her personal investments too. The leveraged positions, the loans against her assets. All calculated risks that had seemed so reasonable when success was the only outcome she'd allowed herself to imagine. Alexandra gathered her things, the framed photo of her parents, the small jade plant she'd somehow kept alive for years, a leather portfolio her first mentor had given her. The office that had been her true home for a decade now felt like a museum of a former life. Her assistant avoided her eyes as she passed. News traveled fast. By tomorrow, she'd be a cautionary tale in an industry that forgave nothing. "I'll have the rest sent to your apartment," the young woman murmured. Alexandra nodded, suddenly unable to speak. The elevator descended, each floor marking another step away from the life she'd constructed so carefully. In the lobby, she hesitated before pushing through the revolving door into the rain. No car waiting. No driver today. Just Alexandra Reed, standing unprotected as the downpour soaked through her expensive suit, washing away the last vestiges of the woman she'd thought she was. The first month after the fall was a blur of lawyers, creditors, and increasingly desperate attempts to salvage something from the wreckage. Alexandra moved through it all with mechanical precision, the same focus that had built her career now, directed at its dismantling. Her Upper East Side apartment went first, sold at a loss to cover the most pressing debts. Then her investment portfolio, liquidated piece by piece at the worst possible time. The art collection she'd carefully curated. The vintage car she rarely drove but loved. Each sale felt like severing a finger. She took a small studio in Brooklyn, telling herself it was temporary. Just a setback, just a chapter. The kind of comeback story she'd one day tell in a business memoir. "You need to file for bankruptcy protection," her lawyer advised during their final meeting. "There's no shame in it. It happens to the best." "I'm not declaring bankruptcy," Alexandra said, the word itself like acid on her tongue. "Then I don't know what else to tell you. The Westlake creditors won't settle. The lawsuit could drag on for years." She signed the final check for his services, nearly the last of her accessible funds, and left his office with no plan beyond stubborn pride. That night in her sparse studio, Alexandra stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by basics from discount stores. Her highlighted hair had grown out, showing strands of gray she'd never allowed before. The woman looking back at her seemed older, hollowed out. "This isn't me," she whispered to her reflection. But the truth was, she no longer knew who she was without the trappings of success. Her phone rang. Her younger sister, Kate, calling for the third time that week. Alexandra let it go to voicemail. What could she possibly say? That the sister who'd always lectured about hard work and responsibility had failed spectacularly? That the smart one in the family had gambled everything and lost? The eviction. Notice came on a Tuesday, taped to her door with impersonal efficiency. 60 days. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd once closed deals worth millions in less time than she now had to find a place she could afford. Alexandra took on consulting work, anything to generate income, but her name was tainted in the industry. Former colleagues avoided her calls. Potential clients researched her and found only stories of failure. The Westlake disaster had become her only professional identity. By the time the 60 days elapsed, she had exactly $247 to her name and nowhere to go. "You can stay with us," Kate had offered when Alexandra finally swallowed her pride enough to call. "The guest room is small, but I can't," Alexandra interrupted. The thought of facing her sister's family, of being the cautionary tale at their dinner table, was unbearable. "I have options. I just need a little time." The lie came easily. She'd been telling versions of it for months, to others, to herself. Her options turned out to be a women's shelter in Queens, where she arrived with a single suitcase containing the remnants of her former life. The intake counselor, a tired-looking woman named Diane with kind eyes, asked questions Alexandra had never imagined answering. "Any medical conditions we should know about? History of substance abuse? Are you fleeing domestic violence?" "No," Alexandra said, the surreality of the moment making her voice sound distant to her own ears. "I'm just between situations." "Diane, had clearly heard every euphemism for homelessness. She nodded without judgment. The shelter's full tonight, but there's a church basement on 38th that takes overflow. It's clean, safe. You can come back tomorrow and we'll see about getting you into the system. The system. Alexandra had spent her career navigating systems, financial, legal, corporate, but never from underneath. The church basement smelled of industrial cleaner and old coffee. 20 cots lined the walls, most already claimed by women whose stories Alexandra couldn't begin to guess. She chose one in the corner, as far from others as possible, and sat with her suitcase between her feet, back straight, eyes forward. Still performing normalcy even when there was no one left to convince. First night, Alexandra turned to find an elderly black woman settling onto the neighboring cot. Her face was mapped with wrinkles, but her eyes were sharp and assessing. "Is it that obvious?" Alexandra asked. "You're still wearing office shoes," the woman said, nodding at Alexandra's worn but clearly expensive leather pumps. "I'm Ruth." Alexandra. Well, Alexandra with the nice shoes, first rule of shelter life. Sleep with your valuables. Anything you can't stand to lose goes under your pillow or stays on your body. Alexandra looked down at her grandmother's watch, the last valuable she hadn't sold. "Thank you." Second rule, the bathroom's communal, and there's always a line in the morning. Early bird gets the hot water. Ruth continued dispensing practical advice while efficiently organizing her own small collection of belongings. Alexandra listened with the same intensity she'd once given to investment briefings. This was her reality now. These were the new rules she needed to master. That night, lying awake on the narrow cot, Alexandra felt something crack open inside her. Not just grief for what she'd lost, but something deeper. The realization that her entire identity had been built on shifting sand. Without her title, her address, her carefully curated image, who was she? What was left when everything external was stripped away? For the first time since the board meeting, Alexandra Reed allowed herself to cry. Silent tears that no one in the darkened room could see. Morning came too quickly, announced by fluorescent lights flickering on, and the sounds of 20 women preparing to face another day. Alexandra followed Ruth's lead, joining the bathroom line with a small toiletry bag, department store samples she'd once collected from business trips and forgotten in a drawer. "Where do people go during the day?" she asked Ruth as they sipped. "Thin coffee from paper cups. Depends. Library's good. Quiet, warm, nobody bothers you if you look like you're reading. Some go to day programs. Some just walk." "Walk where?" Ruth gave her a look that contained equal parts pity and amusement. "Anywhere. Nowhere. When you've got nowhere to be, you're free to be anywhere." Freedom was not how Alexandra would have described her situation, but she nodded anyway. The day stretched before her, empty of meetings, calls, deadlines, all the structures that had defined her existence for decades. She found herself following Ruth's suggestion, walking aimlessly through neighborhoods she'd only ever passed through in taxis. In a small park, she sat watching mothers with strollers, elderly men playing chess, teenagers lounging on the grass. Normal life continuing all around her while hers had derailed so completely. The disconnect was dizzying. A man approached, bearded, weathered, carrying a battered backpack. Alexandra tensed, her hand instinctively tightening on her purse. "Spare." "Any change?" he asked, his voice gentler than she'd expected. "I'm sorry. I can't," she replied, the truth of it still shocking. He studied her for a moment. "New out here, aren't you?" Alexandra didn't answer, but something in her expression must have confirmed his guess. "Michael," he said, offering not his hand, but a small nod of acknowledgement. "If you're heading back to Queens tonight, the Q60. Driver named Hector doesn't check for fares after 8. Before she could respond, he moved on, approaching another bench. Alexandra watched him go, struck by the casual offering of information. A small kindness extended without expectation. That night at the church, Ruth saved her a cot. "Didn't think you'd be back," she said. "Where else would I go?" Alexandra asked. "Most first-timers with your look, they find someone to take them in. Family, friend, man-friend." Ruth shrugged. "Pride's expensive, but it's yours to spend how you want." Alexandra thought of Kate's offer, the guest room in New Jersey. The concerned voicemails she'd stopped listening to. The former colleagues who might help if she could bring herself to ask. All the lifelines she'd refused to grab. "I made my choices," she said finally. "I need to live with them." Ruth's expression softened. "Honey, we're all living with our choices. Question is, what choices you making now?" 3 months passed. Winter descended on the city, harsh and unforgiving to those without shelter. Alexandra had learned to navigate this new world with increasing skill. Which public bathrooms were cleanest, which library branches had the most tolerant security guards, how to make a cup of coffee last for hours in a warm diner. The women's shelter had become her base, though she never stayed more than the maximum allowed 2 weeks before cycling out, to church basements and temporary programs. She'd developed a routine of sorts, a shadow version of her former structured life. What surprised her most was how quickly the unimaginable became normal. How the daily struggle for basic necessities, a shower, a meal, a safe place to sleep, consumed the energy she'd once poured into quarterly projections and market analyses. "You're different from when you first came," Ruth observed one evening, as they shared a bench outside the shelter, waiting for check-in time. "Less stiff." Alexandra smiled faintly. "Less delusional, you mean?" "That too." Ruth pulled her worn coat tighter against the December chill. "You ever think about what's next? Can't live shelter to shelter forever." The question pierced Alexandra's carefully maintained present focus. Next. Future. Words that had once driven her relentlessly forward now seemed dangerous, laden with potential disappointment. "I've been applying for jobs," she admitted. "Administrative. Positions, customer service roles. Anything that might provide steady income." Her resume, once impressive, now had a glaring 2-year gap she couldn't explain without revealing her current circumstances. "Any bites?" "One interview next week. Office manager for a nonprofit." Alexandra didn't mention the dozen rejections that had preceded it, or how she'd had to use the shelter's address on applications after too many "we'll call you" responses that never came. Ruth nodded approvingly. "That social worker, Diane, she likes you. Says you've been helping some of the younger girls with their resumes." It had started almost accidentally. Jasmine, barely 20 and fleeing an abusive boyfriend, had mentioned a job application during dinner. Alexandra had offered to look it over, then found herself rewriting it entirely, coaching the girl through potential interview questions. "It's nothing," Alexandra said. "Just basic skills." "Uh-huh." Ruth's tone was skeptical. "And that budgeting workshop you did last week? The one where half the shelter showed up?" Alexandra shrugged uncomfortably. The workshop had been Diane's idea, after overhearing Alexandra help another resident create a plan for her first paycheck. It had felt strange, standing before a group again. Not in a boardroom, but a dingy community space, teaching women how to stretch minimum wage instead of maximize investment returns. Stranger still was how fulfilling it had felt. How present she'd been, without the constant digital distractions of her former life. How the women's immediate practical questions had engaged her problem-solving skills more genuinely than any corporate strategy session. "You know what I think?" Ruth said, breaking into her thoughts. "I think you were somebody before you came. Here, somebody important who lost it all." Alexandra tensed. She'd been careful not to reveal too much of her past, afraid of judgment, or worse, pity. "We're all somebody," she deflected. Ruth laughed, a warm sound in the cold air. "True enough. But not everybody knows how to explain compound interest to a room full of high school dropouts and make them actually listen. Before Alexandra could respond, a commotion near the shelter entrance caught their attention. A young woman was arguing with the intake worker, her voice rising in desperation. "Please, I just need somewhere for tonight. I've been walking all day. I'm sorry. We're at capacity. You can try the overflow at St. Mark's. I was just there. They're full too." Alexandra recognized her. Melissa, early 30s, new to the shelter system and struggling with the arbitrary rules and limitations. She'd attended the budgeting workshop sitting in the back, silent but attentive. Without thinking, Alexandra approached. "What's happening?" The intake worker sighed. "We're full. Fire code." "I can give up my bed," Alexandra offered. "I have somewhere else I can go tonight." The lie came easily, though where exactly she would go remained unclear. Melissa looked at her with desperate gratitude. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." Alexandra smiled reassuringly, ignoring Ruth's knowing look. After helping Melissa get settled, Alexandra collected her backpack. She'd long since traded the suitcase for something more practical and headed out into the night with no destination in mind. The temperature had dropped further, the wind cutting through her layers. The public library was closed. The 24-hour diner, where she sometimes nursed a coffee until dawn, had recently changed policy, no longer allowing customers to stay more than an hour. Alexandra walked, keeping moving to stay warm, her mind racing through limited options. She could call Kate, finally accept the help she'd been too proud to take. But it was nearly midnight. Showing up at her sister's suburban home now would only confirm every worried suspicion Kate had voiced in her increasingly infrequent messages. Near Bryant Park, Alexandra spotted a familiar figure huddled on a bench. Michael, the man who'd given her transit advice months ago. She hesitated, then approached. "Michael?" He looked up, recognition slowly dawning. "Office shoes," he said, though she'd long since traded those impractical remnants of her past for sturdy second-hand boots. "You're still around." "Seems so." Alexandra gestured to the empty space beside him. "Mind if I sit?" He shifted to make room, pulling his belongings closer. Bad night to be without a spot. "I gave mine up," she explained, then immediately wondered why she was sharing this with a virtual stranger. Michael studied her with newfound interest. "That's either very kind or very stupid." "Probably both." Alexandra smiled ruefully. "Do you know anywhere that's safe? Just for tonight?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "There's a group of us who stay in the underground concourse near the old Citibank building. Security mostly leaves us alone if we're gone by 5 a.m. It was an invitation, Alexandra realized, an extension of trust from one homeless person to another. The Alexandra Reed of 2 years ago would have been horrified at the mere suggestion of sleeping in a public concourse. Now, it sounded like a gift. "Thank you," she said simply. They walked together through nearly empty streets, Michael pointing out landmarks in the homeless geography of Midtown, which loading docks provided shelter from rain, which restaurant workers might offer leftover food at closing time, which security guards were cruel, and which looked the other way. The concourse was dim but warm, with a handful of people already settled in corners with their belongings. Michael nodded to them, receiving quiet acknowledgments in return. "Community rules," he explained quietly. "No drugs, no fighting, everyone looks out. We've managed to keep this spot for almost a year because we're careful." Alexandra absorbed this information. With growing awareness, these people had created structure and safety within their seemingly chaotic circumstances. They had rules, roles, a system, not so different from the corporate world she'd inhabited, just with dramatically different stakes. "Thank you for including me," she said. Michael shrugged. "Someone did it for me once." As she settled against the wall, arranging her backpack as a pillow, Alexandra felt an unexpected sense of peace. Here, in this underground passage with strangers who asked nothing of her but basic decency, she was just another person seeking shelter. No expectations, no performance, no desperate clinging to a former identity. She slept more soundly than she had in months. Morning came too soon, announced by Michael gently shaking her shoulder. Time to move. Security starts rounds at 5. The yes. Group dispersed efficiently, gathering belongings, erasing evidence of their presence. Alexandra followed their lead, struck by the quiet dignity with which they navigated their circumstances. Outside, the winter dawn was breaking over the city, painting the skyscrapers in pale gold. Alexandra found herself looking up at the financial district towers where she'd once belonged, seeing them now from this radically different perspective. Coffee? Michael offered, nodding toward a cart where the vendor was setting up. Guy gives day-olds to regulars. They sat on a bench with their steaming cups, watching the city wake up. Early commuters rushed past, unseeing, already absorbed in phones and earbuds. What did you do? Before? Michael asked suddenly. Alexandra hesitated, then decided truth was simpler than evasion. I ran an investment firm, made a lot of money for people who already had too much of it. She expected judgment, perhaps resentment. Instead, Michael nodded thoughtfully. Figured it was something like that. You have the look, the way you talk. And you? High school history teacher. 23 years. He sipped his coffee. Then cancer, no insurance, medical bankruptcy, wife left, house foreclosed, the usual American tragedy. He recited this devastating sequence with such matter-of-fact calm that Alexandra felt ashamed of her own self-pity. I'm sorry, she said, inadequately. I'm in remission now, he replied with a small smile. Just in time to be homeless. The absurdity of it hung between them. Two educated professionals, rendered invisible by circumstances beyond their control. Alexandra felt something shift inside her, a perspective tilting irrevocably. You know what's strange? She said. I spent my entire career helping wealthy people protect their money from exactly this kind of fate, creating safety nets and buffers and tax strategies. I never once thought I'd need those protections myself. The system works great until it doesn't, Michael agreed. Then you discover there's a whole other America underneath the one you thought you lived in. They finished their coffee in companionable silence as the morning rush intensified around them. Alexandra found herself noticing details she'd once been blind to. The service workers arriving for early shifts, the careful way Michael acknowledged other homeless individuals with a nod of respect, the small kindnesses exchanged in this parallel economy of survival. I have a job interview today, she said suddenly. Office manager at a nonprofit called Second Start. They help people get back on their feet after situations like ours. Michael smiled genuinely. That's great. You'll be good at that. If they'll hire someone with no fixed address who hasn't managed an office in 2 years. Tell them the truth, he suggested. Not everything, just enough. People respect honesty more than perfect resumes. The idea terrified her. Alexandra Reed, former CEO, admitting to homelessness in a job interview? Yet what choice did she have? The carefully constructed fiction of her temporary setback had become unsustainable. Maybe, she said noncommittally. They parted ways near Bryant Park, Michael heading to the library where he spent most days, Alexandra toward the subway that would take her to the interview in Brooklyn. In the bathroom of a coffee shop, she changed into her one interview outfit. A simple blouse and slacks she'd found at a church donation center, carefully maintained despite her transient life. She applied minimal makeup, twisted her hair into a neat bun, and studied her reflection. The woman looking back at her was both familiar and strange, thinner, older, with new lines etched around her eyes, but also somehow more present, more real than the polished executive she'd once been. Tell them the truth, she whispered to herself, echoing Michael's advice. The Second Start offices occupied a converted warehouse space, warm with exposed brick and natural light. Alexandra arrived early, watching the staff interact with clients. Respectful, engaged, without the condescension she'd witnessed at some social service agencies. "Alexandra Reed?" A woman approached, hand extended. "I'm Gabriela Mendez, Executive Director." "Thank you for seeing me," Alexandra replied, falling back on the professional courtesy that had once been second nature. Gabriela led her to a small conference room, where 2 other staff members waited. The interview began conventionally enough. Questions about organizational skills, computer proficiency, ability to multitask in a busy environment. Alexandra answered confidently, drawing on decades of experience while carefully editing her background to focus on transferable skills, rather than specific positions. Then came the question she'd been dreading. "There's a significant gap in your employment history," Gabriela noted, glancing at her resume. "Can you tell us about that?" Alexandra took a deep breath. Michael's words echoed in her mind. The truth. Not everything. Just enough. 2 years ago, I experienced a financial collapse that cost me my career, my home, and most of my personal relationships. She began, her voice steadier than she felt. "For the past 7 months, I've been homeless, staying in shelters and temporary housing while trying to rebuild." The room fell silent. Alexandra continued before she lost her nerve. "During that time, I've learned more about resilience, resource, management, and human dignity than I did in 20 years of corporate success. I've run budgeting workshops at the Queen's Women's Shelter. I've helped other women prepare resumes and practice interviews. I've seen firsthand how broken our systems are for people trying to recover from setbacks." She met Gabriela's eyes directly. "I'm applying for this position because I believe my experience, both professional and personal, gives me a unique perspective on the work Second Start does. I understand both worlds now." Gabriela exchanged glances with her colleagues, then leaned forward. "That's not what I expected to hear." "I understand," Alexandra said, already preparing for rejection. "Thank you for your time." "No, please," Gabriela interrupted. "I meant that as a compliment. Your honesty is refreshing. Most people in your situation would have created a cover story." "I considered it," Alexandra admitted. "But I'm tired of pretending." The conversation shifted then, becoming less an interview and more an exchange of ideas. Alexandra found herself sharing observations about shelter systems, the barriers to employment for those without addresses, the catch-22s that kept people trapped in cycles of poverty. When the formal questions ended, Gabriela walked her out personally. "We'll be in touch very soon," she said, her handshake lingering. "Regardless of this position, I think there might be a place for you here." Alexandra left the building feeling lighter than she had in months. Whether she got the job or not, something fundamental had changed. For the first time since her fall, she'd claimed her story, all of it, the success and the failure, without shame. She walked through Brooklyn streets, no particular destination in mind, just moving with the strange, new energy coursing through her. Near a community garden, she paused, watching volunteers tending winter plantings. Her phone buzzed, the prepaid basic model she'd downgraded to months ago. A text from Kate. "Thinking of you. Please call. Anytime." Alexandra stared at the message, the simple expression of unconditional love breaking through defenses she hadn't realized were still standing. 7 months of silence, yet her sister was still reaching out, still holding space. Before she could reconsider, Alexandra pressed call. "Alex?" Kate's voice was disbelieving, then immediately tearful. "Oh my God, is it really you?" "It's me," Alexandra said, her own eyes filling. "I'm sorry I've been away." "Where are you? Are you okay? We've been so worried." The questions tumbled out, and Alexandra found herself answering with an honesty that would have been impossible before today. "I'm in Brooklyn. I'm not okay." "Exactly, but I'm getting there. It's a long story. I have time," Kate said simply. "I have all the time in the world for you." Standing there on a street corner, Alexandra Reed began to tell her sister the truth about the failure, the homelessness, the lessons learned in the harshest of classrooms. As the words poured out, she felt the last walls around her heart crumbling, making space for something new to grow in their place. 6 months later, Alexandra stood in front of a room of 20 women at Second Start, whiteboard marker in hand, finishing a workshop on financial literacy. "Remember, the system is designed to be confusing," she told them. "That doesn't mean you can't learn to navigate it. Small steps, consistent habits, and knowing your rights. These are your most powerful tools." The women, most formerly homeless, all working to rebuild their lives, nodded with varying degrees of hope and skepticism. Alexandra recognized both reactions intimately. "Same time next week," she said, closing her notebook. "And remember, my door is open if you need individual help with your budget plans." As the room cleared, Gabriella appeared in the doorway, smiling. Another successful session. Alexandra gathered her materials. "I think so." Teresa asked about opening her first bank account, and Janine is ready to look at her credit report. Small victories. Gabriella nodded approvingly. "The only kind that last," Alexandra replied. She hadn't gotten the office manager position. Instead, Gabriella had created something new. A role that combined administrative work with program development, specifically focused on financial empowerment for women in transition. The salary was modest, but it came with a small studio apartment in a building owned by Second Start, reserved for staff and program graduates. After 3 months of proving herself, Alexandra had been promoted to program director, overseeing all of Second Start's financial education initiatives. The irony wasn't lost on her, using skills honed in wealth management to help people manage poverty and near poverty. Yet the work engaged her more deeply than anything in her former career. "Don't forget, board meeting tomorrow," Gabriella reminded her. "They're excited about your proposal for the micro-lending program." Alexandra nodded. "I'll be ready." Her office, a converted storage room with a desk, computer, and walls covered in charts tracking client progress, was a far cry from her corner view at Horizon Ventures. Yet she felt more at home here than she ever had there. On her desk sat 2 framed photos, one of her with Kate's family at Christmas, the first holiday she'd celebrated with them in years. The other a group shot from the shelter, Ruth's arm around her shoulders, both women laughing at some forgotten joke. Her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Community Council approved the proposal. We're getting the resource center." Alexandra smiled. After securing her position at Second Start, she'd helped Michael connect with city officials about converting an abandoned building near Bryant Park into a day center for homeless individuals, a place offering showers, laundry, mail services, and computer access. Michael now worked there part-time while finishing a teaching certification renewal. Their friendship had deepened over months of weekly coffee meetings, where they'd shared both progress and setbacks in their parallel journeys. Back from the edge, there was something romantic blooming between them now, tentative and careful, both aware of their vulnerabilities, but increasingly willing to risk connection. At 5 o'clock, Alexandra locked her office and headed home, still a strange concept. After so long without one. Her studio apartment was small but sun-filled, furnished with second-hand pieces chosen with care rather than the expensive, impersonal decor that had filled her Manhattan residence. She changed into jeans and a sweater, then walked the 6 blocks to Kate's favorite cafe where they met each Wednesday. Their relationship had been rebuilt slowly, painfully at times, as Alexandra learned to accept help without shame, and Kate learned to offer it without judgment. "There she is," Kate waved from a corner table. "I ordered your tea." Alexandra hugged her sister before sitting. "Thanks. How are the kids?" Ethan made honor roll, and Sophie has decided she's going to be an astronaut veterinarian. Ambitious. I like it. They fell into easy conversation. The awkwardness of their early reunions long faded. Alexandra still marveled at how completely Kate had accepted her. Not just her fall from grace, but her transformation into someone neither of them would have recognized 2 years ago. "Oh, I almost forgot," Kate said, reaching into her bag. "I found this while cleaning out Mom's old files." She handed Alexandra a yellowed newspaper clipping, a photo of their grandmother standing in front of a small storefront, Reed's Accounting Services painted on the window. "I never knew she had her own business," Alexandra said, studying the image. Apparently, she ran it for almost 30 years, helping local families and small businesses manage their money. Mom said she charged on a sliding scale, whatever people could afford. Alexandra traced her grandmother's face in the faded photo. The same watch that now adorned her own wrist was visible on the older woman's arm. "She would have been proud of you," Kate said softly. "The work you're doing now. More than the investment firm? Much more." Alexandra tucked the clipping carefully into her wallet. Another piece of herself recovered. Another connection restored. After dinner, she walked home through streets that no longer felt alien. She knew the rhythms of this neighborhood now. Which stores stayed open late? Which neighbors nodded hello? Which corners gathered teenagers after school? Near her building, she passed a woman huddled in a doorway, belongings gathered in a shopping cart beside her. Alexandra stopped, recognizing the vacant stare, the careful arrangement of possessions, the defensive posture. "Excuse me," she said gently. "Have you had dinner?" The woman looked up warily. "I'm fine." Alexandra nodded, respecting the pride in that response. "I work at Second Start, just down on Fulton. We have hot meals every morning at 8, and showers too. No requirements, no forms to fill out first day." She placed her business card and a $20 bill on the step, not too close, not forcing either on the woman. "If you need anything else, my name's Alexandra. That's my direct line." The woman didn't respond, but she took the card after Alexandra walked away. In her apartment, Alexandra went through her evening routine. A simple meditation, a cup of tea, a few pages in her journal. The practice had become essential during her months in the shelter, a way to maintain inner order when external chaos reigned. Now it was simply part of who she was. Her phone rang. Martin, her former colleague from Horizon Ventures. "Alexandra," his voice was warm. "How are you?" "Good, Martin. Really good. How's the corporate world treating you?" "Same as always. Listen, I'm calling because I heard about your program at Second Start, the Financial Literacy Initiative for Women in Transition." Alexandra smiled. "Word travels fast. I'm on the Community Investment Committee at Horizon now. We're looking for local programs to support, and yours, well, it sounds exactly like what we want to be associated with." The irony was almost too perfect. "You want to fund us?" "We'd like to discuss a significant grant. Yes." The board was impressed with the outcomes you're achieving. The same board that had dismissed her without a second thought 2 years ago. Alexandra felt a momentary surge of vindication, quickly replaced by pragmatic focus. "We could certainly use the support," she said. "Our waiting list grows every month." They arranged a meeting for the following week. After hanging up, Alexandra stood at her window, looking out at the Brooklyn skyline. Not the towering monuments to wealth she'd once surveyed from her Manhattan office, but a more human landscape of water towers, fire escapes, and rooftop gardens. Her grandmother's watch ticked softly on her wrist, marking time in a life that had come full circle in ways she never could have imagined. The next morning, Alexandra arrived at Second Start early, reviewing notes for the board meeting. Gabriella joined her, bringing coffee and her characteristic energy. "Ready to dazzle them with data?" she asked. "I think so," Alexandra replied. "But I've been thinking about something bigger." Bigger than the micro-lending program? Alexandra nodded, suddenly certain of the vision that had been forming for months. What if we created a full financial services center? Not just education, but actual banking for the unbanked. Small business support, credit building programs, legal aid for debt issues. Gabriella raised an eyebrow. That's ambitious. I know the right people, Alexandra said. Former colleagues who might be looking for more meaningful work. Regulators who could help navigate the legal structures. We could create something that doesn't exist yet. A bridge between traditional financial systems and the people who've been excluded from them. You're talking about changing the system from within, Gabriella observed. I'm talking about creating a new system alongside the old one, Alexandra corrected, using everything I learned on both sides of the divide. Before Gabriella could respond, the front desk called up. The board members had arrived early. As they headed downstairs, Gabriella squeezed Alexandra's arm. For what it's worth, I believe you could do it. The meeting room was filled with the usual mix of community leaders, donors, and program partners that comprise Second Start's board. Alexandra took her place at the front, slides ready, data organized. As she began her presentation, she felt a familiar confidence. Not the brittle certainty of her corporate days, but something more grounded, more authentic. 2 years ago, I was the CEO of an investment firm, managing over $200 million in assets, she began, watching surprise register on several faces. 18 months ago, I was sleeping in a church basement shelter. Today, I'm standing before you with a proposal that draws on both of those experiences. The room grew still, all attention focused on her words. What I've learned is that financial systems aren't just complicated, they're deliberately exclusive. The same skills that helped my wealthy clients protect and grow their assets are desperately needed by people fighting to establish basic economic security. She clicked to a slide showing the outcomes from their pilot program: increased savings rates, improved credit scores, successful debt negotiations. These results aren't just statistics. They're women who can now afford stable housing, children who don't have to change schools mid-year, families who can weather a medical emergency without spiraling into crisis. As she continued, Alexandra felt something settle within her, a sense of purpose more substantial than anything she'd known before. This was what she'd been moving toward through all the loss, all the struggle. Not a restoration of what had been taken, but the discovery of what had been waiting to be built. After the presentation, after the questions and the unanimous vote, to expand the program, Alexandra stepped outside for a moment of quiet. Spring had arrived in full force, the street lined with flowering trees, their petals occasionally drifting down in the gentle breeze. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ruth. Proud of you, office shoes. Diane says you're changing lives over there. Alexandra smiled, typing back. Just passing on what I learned from the best. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and took a deep breath of the sweet air. Ahead lay challenges, certainly. Funding to secure, systems to build, skeptics to convince. But for the first time in her life, Alexandra Reed wasn't driven by fear of failure or hunger for validation. The woman who had lost everything had found something far more valuable in the ruins, her true work in the world, and with it, herself.